Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network LLC. Entertain, enlighten, and educate. And today, on Lest We Forget Historical, we are going to talk about Trump and his use of the military. It is an opinion piece that you can find in salon.com, written by Gregory D. Foster, who is a contributing writer. And it's an analysis of what he's found to be true about presidents. And his title is Under Trump, America's Military Will Face a Crisis, and History Has Lessons. And since this program is about lest we forget historical, I thought it'd make a very apt subject. So he goes on, first thing, right out of the box, that this won't be a first time that politics has endangered our professional military. And what can you learn from the past? And according to him, the civil military relations in this country will be thrust into turbulent and uncharted waters, driven by a mercurial, domineering commander in chief unlike any other in American history. He has already said that he has quite a lot of disdain for the military and those in uniform. And at the same time, he treats the military as his personal property, which doesn't spell good for any of us, considering that was one of the reasons why we separated from Britain in the first place, was that we did not have to quarter them in our homes. We thought that was a great injustice. So, what is the price one pays? The price of a military sworn to political neutrality, public silence, and a dutiful obedience is the military's reciprocal expectation that its civilian overseers will honor the sanctity of their relationships by conducting themselves professionally and tempering their own demands for politicization. And we have the next 4 years to look at. And as the writer of this article says, all bets are off in the face of a newly empowered commander in chief who uniformly ignores, circumvents, and undermines established norms of protocol and accountability for his own benefit. So, what have we learned? Well, there was a similar confrontation like this. It was called the Billy Mitchell Court Martial. Billy Mitchell, father of the U.S. Air Force, commanded all U.S. Army Air Corps forces in France toward the end of World War I. He was considered argumentative. He was considered outspoken advocate for air power and the formation of a separate air service. He alienated nearly everyone he came into contact with and who he didn't agree with him. Well, we already have that with Mr. Trump, who says that anybody who disagrees with him either should be shot or imprisoned. Moreover, he openly criticized both the Army and Navy leadership because of their incompetence. And so contentious was he that President Calvin Coolidge ordered the War Department to court-martial Mitchell, which it did in 1925 under the catch-all 96 Article of War, for statements considered prejudicial to good order and discipline, insubordinate, contemptuous, and disrespectful, and intending to discredit the War and Navy departments. The court found him guilty on all accounts and suspended him from rank, command, and duty with the forfeiture of all pay and allowances for 5 years. He subsequently had to resign from the service. Does the Mitchell court-martial, which was an act of a small-minded pettiness, must be seen for what it was, an exercise in grand theater? To be sure, there's no one in uniform today possessed by Billy Mitchell's thespian attributes, and Calvin Coolidge was, comparatively speaking, a minor league Retributionists. Only the incoming commander-in-chief can lay claim to being a grand master of the performing arts. Anyone who, by word or action, upstages him or gets in his way may well fall victim to reprisal on the order of the Mitchell Court Martial. As with leaders of autocratic regime, nothing is too small or insignificant to serve as a pretext for a grand show trial meant to demonstrate strongman dominance over the military. And we might ask, in fact, whether former chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Mark Miley, isn't already a potential scapegoat heading for the docks. And then in mid-1932, the bonus marches, some 17,000 out-of-work World War I veterans suffering from the Depression, along with 26,000 families and other supporters, descended on Washington, D.C. to demand early payment of bonuses the veterans had been promised. They camped out on Anacostia Flats and other public spaces that served as bases for operation for their marches and protests. And despite their contributions to the war effort and their downtrodden post-war status, they were widely viewed as a public nuisance. And the then president, Herbert Hoover, ordered the Army to clear out the principal campsite. So Army Chief of Staff Douglas MacArthur, you remember him, World War II, and then Major George Patton, another general to be in World War II, led infantry and cavalry troops, and in doing so, burning the protester shelters and belongings in the process. So, the bonus march wasn't the first nor the last instance of government insensitivity to the plight of veterans. Goes on every single day currently, who have sacrificed for their country only to be discarded as superfluous jetson. The newly infamous Project 2025 conservative policy agenda that serves as a shadow blueprint for the incoming administration calls for widespread across-the-board cuts in benefits and services, including for disabled veterans and the VA's healthcare system. Well, those affected and their supporters have the moxie and feel the urgency to engage in large-scale public protests, very similar to January 6th, when Trump urged his followers to ransack and kill Congress and senators who got in his way. They decided they had the right, and they're going to do it. Or maybe they are not to be prepared to be labeled as insurrectionists and treated as such under the 1807 Insurrection Act. And will those in uniform who may be called on to serve as today's MacArthur and Patton henchmen act dutifully on behalf of the state, the police state, and all guard, some would say, or side with their protesting brethren. A lesson also in the past, a perennial icon of the U.S. Marine Corps. Major General Smedley Butler was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history, including being the recipient of 2 Congressional Medals of Honor. Over more than 3 decades, he fought all over the world in battles and campaigns that fed his own growing cynicism. Quote, I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period, I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. In retirement, Butler produced a small book titled War is a Racket, expressing his distaste over having been a tool for big business interests. Ironically, he was approached in retirement in 1933 by a group of wealthy right-wing businessmen who wanted to overthrow President Franklin D. Roosevelt and install Butler as president. He refused and took his story to Congress, which then produced a lame report that found no one culpable and held no one accountable for what came to be known as the business plot or the Wall Street push. A question for the future. There is no one of Smedley Butler's stature in uniform today. and right-wing businessmen are laughably unlikely threats to a regime that exists largely for their benefit. Yet it isn't totally frivolous to imagine other political, ideological, or business factions that, seeing their interests threatened by a mercurial, impulsive commander-in-chief, would attempt to engineer his ouster. Though any propensity for the overthrow of government has long since been socialized out of America's military, and especially out of its officer corps, it remains an open question whether newly generated circumstances of alienation and disfranchisement might not energize latent, ideologically driven disaffection within the active or retired ranks that will coalesce with other reserve elements of society. Were this to happen, the first order question of whether the inflated public trust and confidence in the military would be lost and will be subsumed by what, by any measure, would be the mother of all constitutional crises. And then in 1949, there was the revolt of the admirals. It was so-called the revolt of the admirals, having been not merely a policy and budgetary dispute, it appeared to be at the time a classic case study in deep-seated inter-service rivalry and civilian control of the military. It was a convoluted affair that developed at the time along four converging tracks. The first, with origins in the latter stages of World War II, concerned proposals for service unification, with the Navy opposed their fear of losing prerogatives and capabilities to central authority. This resolved itself in the 1947 National Security Act. The second track concerned general agreement, at least between the Army and the Navy, and then the Air Force, of the future importance of strategic air power. This merged with a third track, which involved intense competition between the Navy and the Air Corps/Force over weapon systems, specifically over whether to invest in a new aircraft carrier or a strategic bomber. That, in turn, ran up against major spending cutbacks in favor of more domestic spending preferred by President Harry Truman and the Secretary of Defense. This all came to a head in congressional hearings when the Navy fought largely alone for its preferences in the face of opposition from the President, the Defense Secretary, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Truman, who viewed this as an affront to civilian control, had the Chief of Naval Operations relieved and other senior officers transferred to dead-end assignments. The start of the Korean War in 1950 put an end to the affair by demanding greatly increased defense spending on all fronts. It just seems like nobody's learning from the past and applying it to the future. And so it goes on. So you have to understand that one should be very careful about what one wishes for when they vote in the president of their choice. And of course, making it even more complicated is the fact that billions of dollars were paid to the Trump campaign, not only to get him elected, but also for his upcoming inauguration on Monday, January 20th. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And you can listen or hear this episode of Lest We Forget Trump and the Military all over again at https://passionatworldtalkradio.com. Scroll down to the bottom of the page where you see State of Current Affairs. Click on that. It'll take you to a web page with a Google link. Click on the Google link and it will take you into the belly of the YouTube beast where you can view all of our videos, or go check out our marketing blog, same title, passionatworldtalkradio.com/blog. Go to the blog and it will have the audio part of the same episode. We want to thank you very much for listening. And please remember, you want to start podcasting, then contact a 19-year veteran. The Obstacles of Podcast Training with Lillian Cauldwell. Go over to https://education.passionatworldtalkradio.com/masterclass. or if you're interested in artificial intelligence, go with the best. Go over to http:// with Lillian, LILLIAN.com, and get some interactive training. It's a no-brainer. And for your information, AI was allowed out of Pandora's box and is only going to get more complicated. So start learning how to use it now. And last but certainly not least, you want your memoirs out to the world, to the universe, even to those little purple men out there who are supposed to be meat eaters, whatever. Contact us at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com or text us at 484-364-1032 and sign up and get your memoirs out to the universe. It's a no-brainer. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.